Welcome all to day 3, the final day of the Climate Crisis, a Limmud Festival of Jewish Ideas. My name is Hannah Henza. I'm the Director of Networks and Leadership, and I am very pleased today to be with Meesh Kossoy from Pardes, who is calling in from Israel at 7 o'clock, I think, is your time. So thank you very much for joining us when things are very hectic in your space. So we're very grateful that you're here, and I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you. I'm sure that more folks will trickle in, but why don't you take it away?
Sure. Okay, here's an icebreaker. Do you know what this is? Just unmute yourself and say.
It's hard to see with your background. Oh yeah, hold it a little closer.
If I put it right in front of my face, can you see it?
There we go.
Now you can see it well. Who knows what it is?
Like a citron, something like that?
It's big as my face. So it's not a citron, because that's an etrog. Yeah, I mean, you could make that. It's not that. Oops. Okay. Do you know what it is, Hannah? Oh my gosh. This wasn't the hard one. This was the warm-up question. This is a I'm sorry that I'm not going to turn off the background because it'll be too confusing. This is a pomelo. You're all on the East Coast, apparently. This is a pomelo. Raise your hand if you've eaten this fruit before. I picked it myself today off the tree. This one's a little harder, I think. Let's see if you know what this one is. Can you, the whole branch, you see these? Wow, it makes me disappear. It's magic. These are,
I assume it's not fresh dates.
These are kumquats. And, there you go. Now you got a good one. Kumquats that also got picked today. But last but not least, oh my gosh, I don't blur my background, choose virtual background. Never mind. Okay, this is what I was doing today. It's a pineapple tree.
Wow.
And it's a pineapple shoot. You know, the bracha on pineapples, you might know this already, that the bracha on pineapples is not eitz, but rather adamah, the blessing you say over vegetables, because they don't grow trees. They take 3 years to grow, but they don't grow on trees. You have to replant them again. So we spent the day. Perhaps I am the Rosh Beit Midrash of Machon Pardes in Jerusalem. And it is a Beit Midrash where you can come for a week in the summer, 3 weeks in the summer, a week in the winter. You can learn. We have a lot of stuff also happening, wonderful activities happening also in America. A semester, the month of Elul, a year, or professional training. I really recommend it for anyone who's thinking about Jewish education. In 2002, we lost 2 of our students to in the Hebrew University bombing, Ben Blutstein and Marla Bennett. And every year, once a year, we go and do a day of chesed. This year, in their memory. This year, you may have heard, one of the things that's happening in the war in Israel is that almost all of the foreign workers who do agricultural work in Israel fled on October 7th and haven't come back. And Palestinians who also do agricultural labor haven't been able to come into work. And so the agricultural industry in Israel is really in danger of total collapse. And the state of Israel, the people of Israel, forget the state because the state's useless, but the people have decided to step up in this way of trying to volunteer in farms to help them stay so that the farms can stay afloat. So today all of us went and planted, the party student body went and planted 1,000 that maybe thousands of pineapple sprouts, and that is about having being able to have local farming, and being able to support local agriculture altogether, which obviously would be very endangered if we weren't able to, if farms collapsed this year. So I thought it would be fun just to share this pineapple, that you can know what it is. That was my warm up. Now let's talk about Shmitah. What I want to do, what I'd like to do, maybe if people who feel like they're up to, just to put, you've got the source sheet, and if you would like to enter into the chat what you were thinking, what brought you into the class today. Why are you here? That will help me just know why you're here. Okay, while you guys are doing that, I'll ask you a question. Oh, just feel free to unmute yourself and give me I'm going to make this argument. The argument is going to be to take what I think is boldest and most radical biblical institution, which is Shmitah. I think it's an amazing environmental institution, and I think it's also an economic vision and a radical vision for society. And I want to take that radical vision and I want to hold it up against what I think is the most radical of the rabbinic Mishnaic institutions, and compare them together and show how they are so completely different from each other, and yet both of them are absolutely amazing. That is my hope for the next 42 minutes. In order to do that, we have to take Shmitah, we have to take the institution of Shmitah and know what it is. So let me just hear from you. What do you know already about Shmitah? What does it mean? What are the things that are let's say, what's prohibited on Shmitah?
It's like a Shabbat for the agricultural sector, where you're not supposed to do active farming or even harvesting. You're supposed to leave the land alone once every 7 years.
You leave the land alone once every 7 years. And who gets to eat the produce that grows on the land? The volunteers, that is to say. Right? Let's say you have an apple tree. An apple tree will continue to grow apples. Aha, excellent. Forgive loans. Correct. Go back to this question of what happens to the apples that grow, since we don't harvest during the Shemitah year, and we have to release. Shemitah lishamet means to release, to let go of your ownership of the land. So so who gets to eat the apples? Sounds like I should share screen. Let me share the screen and show you. Let's look at this together. You've got the source sheet, but we can look at it together. I'm going to start with this one. It's the institution of Shmitah appears multiple times, and because we have such a short amount of time today, I'm going to go straight to source number 4, to the longest one in Vayikra, in Leviticus 25. So he says that there is actually stacking dolls. Okay, multiple institutions. The first one, as Robert said, is Shabbos. There is that you shall that there's Shabbat. And then the second thing is that you have every 6 years you sow your field and you can prune your vineyard. But on the 7th year, it's a Sabbath of complete rest, a Sabbath of the Lord. You shall not sow your field or prune your vineyard. You shall not reap the aftergrowth of your harvest, or gather the grapes from your untrimmed vines. It shall be a year of complete rest for the land. And then it's how, this is the question I was asking you before. Who gets to eat what grows? What if something does grow on the land? Because things will grow by themselves constantly. The land will go wild. You may eat whatever the land during the Sabbath will produce, but not just you, your male and female slaves, the hired and bound laborers who live with you, and the cattle and the beasts in your land may eat all of its yield. So what you see here is well, I can't see what I put in the chat, but is that the land becomes ownerless, and you don't work the land. The land belongs. It's a Sabbath to the Lord. Okay, it's for the land and to the Lord, and it can still be eaten. Then there's an additional institution which makes this even more bold, which is that afterwards you have 7 weeks of years, 7 times 7, and then you get the Jubilee year, a total of 49 years, and then you sound the shofar in the 7th month on the 10th day of the month. That's Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, and you shall have the horn sounded throughout your land, and then you shall hallow the 50th year, the Jubilee year. Okay, Jubilee means 50. You shall proclaim release throughout the land for all of its inhabitants. V'karatza dror la'aretz l'chol yoshveha. This is the verse that is on the Liberty Bell. Have you been to the Liberty Bell and seen it? This verse is in there both in Hebrew and in English. I cried the first time I saw it. It's really the idea of that's what liberty is, and it being a model for the entire world of proclaiming liberty. Each of you shall return to its holding, and each of you shall return to its family, to his family. The 50th year shall be a Jubilee year for you. You shall not sow, you shall not reap the aftergrowth of the harvest or the untrimmed vines, for it is a Jubilee. It shall be holy to you. You may eat only the growth direct from the field. In this year of Jubilee, each of you shall return to his holding. When you sell, okay, and then it goes on and says in great length that if you sell your land, that you will then, in the 50th year, it goes back. There's no such thing actually as a permanent selling of the land. Rather, it's really a lease for up to 50 years to the Jubilee year, depending on what's going on. So maybe it's easy to, so we've got, I put in the chat what the basic pieces of Shmitah are. In Exodus, it's just don't harvest and leave for poor animals. Leave it for the poor and for the animals. And it's part of the Shabbos. It's part of Shabbat. It's called Shmitah there, okay? The year of release. In Leviticus 25, it's called a Shabbaton. Shabbat, it's the 7th year for the land. There, it says similar things. Don't plant. Well, here, in addition to not harvesting, it says you shouldn't plant, prune, sow, and that everyone gets to eat it. And then, as Richard suggested, reminded us in Deuteronomy 15, it adds to that you have to release loans. Okay, that is to say that this is important to understand when you're thinking about this is an agricultural law too, because in the situation of agriculture, you need seed money. If your crop fails one year, you need a loan in order to be able to plant seeds the following year. And if you don't, you lose your land. But what happens sometimes is someone takes a loan of seeds and it fails the second year. And if in such a situation, of course, they'll go greater and greater into debt until they lose their land altogether. So Deuteronomy 15 forces you to release the loans and start over. And then there's this additional institution called the institution of the Jubilee, the Yovel. Yovel after the horn, the shofar is also called. It's the horn of a Yovel, of a ram. So that is a proclamation of liberty, which means that you're releasing slaves, a return to ancestral holdings, and no planting or harvesting. So it's an additional, after you've already had a 7th year, you get right next to it a second Shmitah year, and you really have sort of 2.5 years, 3 years off of planting and harvesting. So that the Jubilee year is like the 7th year is a small reset, and the Jubilee year is a big reset. And Shabbat is an even smaller reset. Okay, so we've got these 3 institutions: Shabbat, Shabbat, Shmitah, and above it, Jubilee. That's the simple reading. That's what the institution is. And now I'd like to think about what are the values? What's the economic vision and the agricultural and environmental vision that is that's behind this institution. I'm open to, I'd love to hear people speak if they would, if there's someone who would like to articulate a value that you see there. Bob, thank you. Okay, Myron, thank you.
I think there is an fundamental antagonism between traditional agriculture and environmental stewardship. And the beginning of the Hebrew nation didn't catch the train at the right time. We caught the train after that mistake occurred in civilization. The word civilization is sort of the same thing as cultivation. And we've been cultivating wrong for over 10,000 years, and it's destroying our soils. And if we had not been doing that from the get-go, the Shmitah year would have been much less important. Because another session in this group, you'll see benign agriculture, and you don't till the soil, and you let the animals walk on their own feces and improve the soil. And we don't do either of those. Before this U.S. was inhabited by the Western culture, there was 20 foot of topsoil. We've lost all of that, almost all of that. If we hadn't lost the topsoil, we wouldn't have a climate problem.
Myron, I appreciate all the things you're saying, and I'd love to pick them apart. But I'm asking, and I feel like it's important to look at what is the Torah's vision for values, and in looking in the Shmitah year, or even in this 3-part cycle. What is the vision here? Bob, go ahead.
I think what's so interesting is that all of the people are going to do it at the same time. So we've been attending to the land and to our economy, but there's something about the whole community resting or simplifying at the same time. If this was only about pragmatics, they could have said, these tribes will observe Shmitah in the 1st year and these other tribes in the 2nd year. It would have been so much simpler.
It would have been so easy if we did that, because then everyone would leave their, so what I hear you saying, Bob, thank you, is that one value is the value of leaving your land fallow, that the Shabbat should have, that the land should rest sometime. But you could make the land rest easier if there were rotations, right? Everybody has a day off, but it's not a fixed day off. It's a rotating day off. So some people work on Shabbat, and some people work on Sunday, and some people work on Monday, and it always rotates, and so too with the fields. But there's a vision here, which is not only an farming vision, but it's actually a communal vision, a vision of all of us are going to rest at the same time. And that becomes harder on the one hand, because we need somebody to, like if you think about in Israel, where there's a forced day of rest, and stores are closed, so that it's harder to get, it is complex sometimes to run an economy with things that are not open on Shabbat. And yet it creates a social environment in which everyone can walk the streets on Shabbat, and there's a sense of communal rest. And when you do this in an agricultural situation, it will, and how much the more in the seventh year, you'll have a situation where everyone is taking a deep breath. And that year, there's going to be not just, there's going to be, in addition to the land lying fallow, you're going to have a situation where people have a lot of free time on their hands. And what are they going to do? They're going to get together and have picnics and build community and learn it and study at part 8 on their sabbatical. And that's a social vision. And all of the people are, because they're resting together, there's not some people that are making a fortune and other people who are not, but everyone is actually, it's a tremendous egalitarian, it's a posture of egalitarianism because everyone owns the land in the same way. No one has ownership of the land on this Sabbath. And so you're going to be able to, so there's a chance for the rich people to feel like the poor people for the year and for the poor people to feel like the rich people this year. And that's going to create social solidarity. So it's environmental, but it's also social. And I want to add one more thing, which is that it's an economic vision. Okay, and then I'm going to take Jeremy, your comment on I want to hear. But this vision also, what happens is nobody, when you know you're going to have to release your loans at the end of 7th year, and you know, let's say at the Jubilee, okay, that you feel it in a small way in the 7th year and in a huge way in the 50th year. In the 50th year, when we entered the land was divided amongst the 12 tribes, as Myron said, right? Everybody, or no, that was also Bob, that the land was divided up. Every family had a plot. And at the end of 50 years, each person will go, or each family goes back to their ancestral plot. And so there will become a redistribution of income over the course of those 50 years. But at the end of 50 years, it will restart all over again. And so that becomes an economic vision, which is a different approach to accumulation of wealth altogether. Okay, now accumulating wealth will no longer be the primary goal, because you know you can accumulate wealth and there are pieces of it that you can bring with you, but there's going to be a restart every 50 years, and so you'll never end up with mega rich people like we have in our current world. Jeremy.
So you took some of what I was going to say, but I can still add a bit. So this consequence of every family going back onto their plot, on the one hand, it means that, I mean, you end up as people multiply, you end up with potentially issues because you've only got so much land and you've got all these people. Although I suppose that is the same for everyone. Oh, excuse me, the land is the same amount regardless. The other thing is you can't accumulate land wealth, but it means that you so maybe you go for gold, let's say, if that will, you go for something that is outside of Shmitah, so it has that kind of impact on where wealth is valued.
I think this is definitely, it won't be a total reset, but it will be a shift in the way things manage. I want to add to this what you're saying, Jeremy, and just the idea of distributive justice. Distributive justice is that everybody has the same amount, quality of outcome. Okay, we went into the land and everybody got 5 acres of land. Every family had 5 acres, and you know in 50 years that every family will have 5 acres. And land, of course, some will go for gold also, but it was primarily an agricultural society. So land was the major form of wealth in the biblical time. So in the times of so that's distributive justice. that every family has the same amount. However, it's not just distributive justice, because that's once every 50 years. You go back to everybody having the same amount. But on the in-between years, it will turn out that there's also retributive justice. Retributive justice means everyone gets what they deserve. That is to say that if you work hard and you're very successful, you'll be able to purchase more land, you'll be able to gain more wealth, and you'll keep, and you will increase your wealth over the course of the 50 years. And then in the 50th year, you'll start over again. Okay, so that is a balance between both distributive justice, which is everyone should have the same, and retributive justice, everyone can have. Your hard work is rewarded, because we all understand that if you knew you were always going to have five acres no matter what, then you're disincentivized from work. This way, you're incentivized to keep working. So the values that I say here, okay, so it's an ideal. Now we can get to the situation. Now, I'm not sure what S stands for, but okay. Mrs. Blackman says that wait a minute, but families over time, families might not grow at the same rate, and so you might end up that the Cohen family, the Blackman family will have 50 people, and the Cohen family will have 200 people, and everybody's going back to their same 5 acres. So it feels like it's a little bit idyllic. And I think that is poking a hole in this beautiful vision. Hold on a second. Let me just make sure I've got that. I want to come to what you're saying here, but I want to make sure that I don't miss all of the things, the things that were most important for me to share with you. What are the values that we see in this bold thing, in this bold institution? One, that there's distributive equality. That is to say, we give people a chance to get out of poverty and have their 5 acres all the time. There's also retributive justice, a kind of equality of opportunity. We give people, you have a chance to get ahead if you work hard. There's 6 years of capitalism and 6 days of work. And you reap what you sow during that time. And then there's a value of rest, okay, and a very high. I didn't emphasize this enough before. We're not just about trying to acquire endlessly. We will by stopping every 7 years and making do for 1 year, and all of us are making do with 1 year. You can't for that year. We come to understand that we don't need as much, and we make do with less. And we prioritize rest, freedom for learning, for remembering God, to remember that life is not just about work. That is an environmental message and an economic message of the highest order. And I think the one that is the hardest for Americans to get their head around, this idea that it's not about growth. It's also about rest. It's also about release. The idea of release is about emunah, a sense of being willing to be a little bit vulnerable, and to understand that enough is enough, and you don't need to accumulate. I need help on this all the time. Also, it's like have I ever saved enough for retirement? The year of release teaches us of this idea that enough can be enough. So these are the big values as I see them in the Shmitah, in this Shabbat Shmitah Jubilee institution. It's big and bold, and Miss Blackman started to poke at the problem of it, which is, it seems like it's built for an ideal world, and will it work in practice? And there's another piece that really makes it very hard to make it work in practice, which is that it depends on the rich people who have acquired 50 hotels to get up off their hotels and release them and give it back to the family that owned them before. And so and it's so idealistic, it's so bold that I think it never happened. The Torah spends a lot of time telling us what's going to happen if we don't do it the way we're supposed to. And then we, in fact, get kicked off the land because we didn't do it the way we were supposed to. And I know for a fact historically that we did do the Shmitah. It was there. Shmitah, the year of release, was observed and violated. But the Jubilee year, we don't have any archaeological evidence, written evidence, any evidence of any kind that it was ever kept at all. It was only kept in the breach. The Jubilee year was just so big and bold that nobody was willing to do it. So it turns out to be not realistic. It's a beautiful idea, but it's hard to sell. It's hard to sell to the people who are rich, who have a lot of power. So I want to hold that institution, and I want to take the next 15 minutes to look at another great institution. If you had to say, so I want to summarize what we've learned so far. These are the values of the Shmitah year. Is beautiful not just because it leaves the land fallow, which is a beautiful environmental message, but not because it recognizes, not just because humans don't own the land and God is supreme, which is a beautiful environmental message, but also because it tells us enough is enough. And also because it tells us that we can think about equality and justice in a different way than we have up until now. And the problem with it is that it's unrealistic. It's so big and it's so bold that it didn't work in reality. That's what the Bible lays out as justice. We could stop there, but I want to introduce, if you had to say social justice in Jewish, how would you say social justice in Jewish? 2 Hebrew words.
Tzedakah.
Ha! Tzedakah, that's a good word, a biblical word. I was going to suggest Tikkun Olam. Tikkun Olam, usually people say, I want to do Tikkun Olam, okay, so that which includes, of course, giving tzedakah, but Tikkun Olam means to repair the world. It's a term that doesn't appear anywhere in the Torah, in the Tanakh, in the Bible, but does and appears for the first time in the Tannaitic period, in the time of the Mishnah, 200 CE. And at that time, the Mishnah is organized in general by topic. Okay, there's a whole tractate on Shabbat and a tractate about Purim and a tractate about Pesach. And when you want to know the rules, you turn to those things. But there's 2 chapters within the tractate about divorce law, which are organized around rather than being organized around a topic, are organized around a value, Tikkun Olam. All of the things that the rabbis decreed, tikkun means to repair. Takana means decree. So you see that they're the same root. The idea of a takana is a decree, and tikkun is a repair. And in the middle of, it's really remarkable to me that in the middle of the Mishnah, because the Mishnah has 6 orders. In the middle of the middle section of the orders, if you count Masechtot, 64 books, you'll get to the middle. The 32nd one is the laws of divorce, and in the 4th and 5th chapters of the 9-chapter book of Gittin, so smack in the middle of the Mishnah, are these 2 chapters that are all of them organized around the principle of Tikkun Olam. They are all of them decrees, takanot, that the rabbis decreed for the sake of Tikkun Olam. And I'd like to look at them together. Let me share the screen again. we're not gonna, there's a lot of them and it would take months to learn the mission, to learn the whole thing. But I'd like to just maybe look at two of them with you. Here we go. The first one, I will look at these two. 4:3 says, Hillel decreed Prose Bowl because of Tikkun Olam. I don't know if you've ever heard of, some of you don't know what Prose Bowl is, I'm sure. Some of you may have heard of it. Prose Bowl is a, as you know, you have to, as Richard said, Robert said before, you have to forgive loans in the sabbatical year. And we all understand what will happen if I tell you, if it's the 5th year or the 6th year, and I say, I really need a loan, and you already have a significant, and I already owe you a few $100s. And I say, could I just borrow another couple $100s? I promise to pay you back before the 7th year. You will think that I'm a bad risk and you won't want to give me the money. Okay. And the Torah already anticipates that and says, let me see. Sorry. Did I stop share? No, I am still sharing screen. I just lost it on my, sorry. Okay, I'm having a hard time controlling my screen right now. Too many pieces on the thing, so you'll forgive me. You'll just trust me. The Torah says, I know that you're not going to want to make a loan in the 7th year. So I want to tell you that you better make a loan or else I'm going to get you in trouble. And Hillel looked around and he saw that people were not making loans anyway. And he said, since the thing that's most important is that there should be credit available, it's absolutely essential that credit should be available because people need the money for seed money. So what did he do? He set up something called a Prose Bowl. You hear that it's a Greek word, not a Hebrew root, which would have 3 letters like tikkun. And it is the notion that you can, it's a legal workaround. This lays down the groundwork really for the selling of chametz that some of you will be doing this week, is to say, I have to give up all of my loans, my personal loans. I have to forgive the debts. But corporations aren't people, so they don't have commandments. And so I give the debts to the Beit Din, and I say, you hold it for me in the 7th year, and the Beit Din then will let you collect it in the 8th year, even after the sabbatical year. And this makes me, so what Hillel does is actually create a workaround around this, a way of getting out of this beautiful mitzvah called Shmitah is being directly undermined by Hillel through the institution of Prose Bowl, and he calls it Tikkun Olam. I would call it supply side economics, trickle down economics. Many of you remember these days of the Reaganomics, which is the idea that you give the rich people, the Torah gave poor people a chance to start over if they want to, if they need to in the 7th year, and start again from zero, get out of debt. And Hillel saw that the rich people weren't willing to give people loans, and therefore decided to tell the rich people, okay, fine, so you don't have to forgive your debts. We'll let you give, the main thing is you should give the loans, and if you don't forget the debts, it's okay. Never mind that the Torah wanted the poor people to be able to start over. We're going to take that away from them, and you can continue to acquire. You, the rich, can continue to acquire as long as you give the debt, as long as you give the loans. This strikes me as anything but Tikkun Olam. It seems you would think that it is really a way of helping the rich instead of. Or does it help the poor? I guess it helps the poor because now they have credit available. But it helps the poor by helping the rich. And this feels to me like a little bit counterintuitive, quite different than the quite different than the biblical institution of Shmitah. Let me give one more example, also from the time of Hillel and Shammai. If a man was half bondman and half freedman, he should labor one day for his master and one day for himself. That's what Hillel says. Okay, if you have somebody who's half and half, okay, he's that he Sunday, Tuesday, Thursday, he works for his master. Monday, Wednesday, Friday, they work for themselves. Shammai says, what are you talking about? You've set it up so that somebody can be half slave, but you haven't, you've said that's good for the master, right? The person, the slave owner owns the slave 3 days a week, but it doesn't help the slave themselves. Why? I should have rewritten this without gender. I apologize. The slave can't get married, because a free person can marry free people, and slave people can marry slave people. And the person who's half and half, who are they supposed to marry? They can't marry either. And you can't have a situation where somebody can never marry. The world was created. We've got a human right that everyone that everyone should be able to have children. So, for the sake of Tikkun Olam, they make the slave owner let the slave free, and the bondman and the slave writes a note: I owe you for my value. This goes on to say, let's see if I can get down there to show it. Oh yeah, having a hard time with my cursor. But it's going to work this way. The school of Hillel changed their opinion and taught according to the opinion of the school of Shammai. So Shammai, this is one of those rare cases where Shammai wins. And for the sake of Tikkun Olam, if there's a half slave, and they want to get married, then you have to release them entirely, and then they owe you their value. Is this social justice? Absolutely. It's an improvement of the status of the poor. But it's a funny way of improving the status of the poor, because if I wanted to improve the status of the slave, I would abolish slavery like Abraham Lincoln. Right? Like, it just makes this is a very incremental way of creating justice. It makes both these two decrees and all of the ones that are on your source sheet that you can bring home. There's another one here that feels especially, the very next one feels especially relevant for this moment. Captives should not be ransomed for more than their value because of Tikkun Olam. Okay, once upon a time, most of the slaves were taken, or captives were taken in the context of war. And then they would end up and Jews suffered this very much because we're caught between major powers. So there would be war between, let's say, the Crusaders and the Muslims, and the Muslims would come through and they'd slaughter a lot of people, and they'd also take captive a few thousand Jews, and then they'd sell them. They'd bring them back to Saudi Arabia, and they'd sell them as slaves. This was not, and it's not unique to any particular religion. This was true of the Persians and the Greeks, and this is how the world worked. And it's a mitzvah, of course, for us as Jews to redeem one another from slavery, and we did. But we were told that we're not allowed to ransom someone for more than their value on the slave market because of Tikkun Olam. Why is this Tikkun Olam? How much is a person worth? We've got 133 hostages right now, and they are infinitely valuable. There's no end to what we'd be willing to give for them back. On the other hand, it's a matter of Tikkun Olam not to redeem them, because when you redeem them, you inflate the price. Then the market goes up, and then the next time you want to redeem a hostage, the price is even more than 50 people per hostage. Is this Tikkun Olam? It's a really crazy way to think about Tikkun Olam. These are the kind of ways, if you see, the rabbis have laid out social justice, visions of social justice that make compromise with the injustice in the world. They are incremental justice. They work with the powers that be and make small changes in a broken world. Small changes in a broken world. So very different than the bombastic vision that's laid out in the Torah. The Torah lays out a bombastic vision which is uncompromising. You have to go back to give up all of your wealth in the 50th year, and everyone has to be fully equal. That's beautiful, but it's not realistic. It doesn't work. The rabbis of the Mishnah say, I want something that's going to work, and therefore I'm going to make peace with inequity. I'm going to make compromises with slavery. I'm going to make compromises with terrorists. I'm going to make with hostages. I'm not going to redeem every hostage. I'm going to make compromises with the rich people, and I'm not going to, and I'm going to let them not forgive their debts. And in those ways, I'm going to improve the world in small ways. This, on the one hand, is also a vision for justice. It's not as bold as the vision laid out in the Torah, but it's a vision that can be achieved in small steps. That the only way to work in the world is to, as Michael Walzer says, wherever you are, it's probably Egypt. And there's somewhere out there that's the promised land. And the only way to get there is to go out and march. So here he's saying, I can't get to the promised land like that. I can get to the promised land in small ways. And says say the rabbis, I'm willing to compromise with absolute Torah values, even to give up a little bit on Shmitah in order to take responsibility for doing what I can do in the world, and not to give up on some, rather than hold to an ideal that can't be realized. So what we have here is two radically different visions of social justice. Both of them absolutely and immensely beautiful. The biblical vision, which is bombastic and bold but unachievable, and the rabbinic vision, which makes compromises, but is rooted in takanot. It's a way of saying to God, you had a good idea, right? Hillel has the nerve to say to God, yeah, you wanted the rich people to forgive their debts, but they're not willing to. So I'm gonna take away the right of the poor people, and it'll be for their own benefit. It'll be it's for the best. Take my word for it, God. And that itself is bold. The vision of justice is not as absolute. It's not as revolutionary as the Shmitah principle, but it is revolutionary in the sense that it takes responsibility for living in the world as it actually is right now, even at the expense of saying to God, I know a little bit better than you, and this is the way the world has to be right now in order to get better at this stage. So to me, both of these visions are incredibly powerful. The Shmitah vision is to be held up, and I believe was held up by the rabbis as the ideal way to move. It's held up as a principle, as values, but that's unachievable. And the way to get to those absolute values as much as we possibly can, and we'll never quite get there, is through Tikkun Olam, but we want to take responsibility for the world. That's my thesis. And I hope I've introduced you to two important principles, and that you've gained from visiting them. My time is up. Thank you so much for joining. Hannah, are we allowed to take comments after we stop pressing record, or we're using?
If you want to hang out in this room for just a couple more seconds, we can do that. I will say the session is officially over. We do have another session happening in 10 minutes if anybody wants to join in that. And yes, I'll stop the recording, and if you want to hang out here.
Thank you all for coming.